Hey guys, so having now defeated the boss, I want to talk to you about Slothasor, the first encounter of Wing 2 in the Salvation Pass. If you guys are having trouble getting through this fight, hopefully this guide will be something of a use to you, and if you're not planning on raiding at all, hopefully this will keep you in the loop of how exactly Arena have been designing things. Overall, I'm very happy with this encounter, and specifically one of the comments the devs made before it came out where they said that it wasn't necessarily harder than Veilguard, it was just different, I think was pretty bang on. That said, I struggled more on this than I did against Veilguard, but maybe that's just because I got to try Veilguard in the betas, who knows. So I want to talk a little bit about my experiences. Let's just jump straight in with some of the mechanics. Generally speaking, I would say Slothasor, what's really cool about him is he's about a whole bunch of mechanics that we saw in Dungeons, but we didn't see in Wing 1 of the raid. In Dungeons, which were classically our end game, if you will, that weren't very hard, you found that projectile reflects, projectile mitigation, namely, and blind fields, blocks, things like that were crazy overpowered. And so then when they released raids Wing 1, it made sense that that wing never had those mechanics at all, really. It forced people to look into new tools. It forced them to get out of their comfort zones and try new things, because the problems they're faced with by the raids weren't the same ones that they were faced by the dungeons. But here at Slothasor, the devs are basically saying, okay, so you think that projectile mitigation, blinds, blocks, and all that stuff's overpowered. You think you know it. Here, let's turn it up to 1,000 and see how you fare. So there's a lot of mobility, there is a lot of ways to get around the damage that is coming on you, but the coordination you need as a group to maintain those defenses is really what's being tested here. The fight is going to play with not only tons of projectile-based stuff, but also boon corruption. This isn't something we've seen, this is a core mechanic I want to see more focus on in the future, but essentially what will happen is if your defenses fall, the enemies will corrupt and transfer your positive boons into negative ones. That's really bad when you have, say, a Chronomancer that would be giving you perma quickness that's now responsible for lots of slow, or a bit of stab is getting thrown out in your group and all of a sudden that's getting turned into fears. So it's a cool, very different encounter. Let's jump into it. What you guys will have been seeing in the background most prominently, I guess, is a green floor. This is the environmental effect, and this is the first thing I really want to explain to you guys. It's one of the other really flavorful things that they've done with this encounter. So ignoring the boss altogether, the room is filled with a green haze, a green poison that you cannot survive if you stand in. It does pretty big chunks of flat damage and also pulses out a lot of poison on you. The poison condition damage itself isn't too crazy, but don't forget this is poison, so it's reducing the incoming heals on you, and certainly it is not something you can easily survive on for very long whatsoever. So basically you don't want to be in the green stuff, but the entire room except a tiny portion of the entrance is the green stuff. So what exactly do you do? Well, this mechanic involves the mushrooms in the room. These mushrooms have nothing to do with the mastery, so you don't have to worry about that. But removing the poison is a two-step process. First of all, you need to pick a player to eat one of the white mushrooms that's in the room. When you very first start, as you guys can see here, the white mushroom spawns at the beginning, nice and easy for you to get. Once that's been eaten, it goes away, and another one will spawn somewhere else in the room a little bit later that you need to be aware of. But once you eat that white mushroom, that one player that did it is actually going to become a slubbling. It will transfer them completely, remove all of their skills, and replace them with a new one. So a slubbling can survive out in the green stuff. They don't get hurt by it. Great. Not only that, though, but their skill 1, this is the second step of the two-part process, allows them to eat red mushrooms in the area. So the white one makes you a slubbling. The red ones are responsible for the green haze. So as your little friend slubbling runs around and eats the red mushrooms, it gets rid of the poison and creates paths for your friends. Now, you can only be a slubbling for a very short period of time, so you want to eat as many mushrooms as you can in that period of time. And then when you transfer back into a player, it's a lot like with Sabathur, where you had the explosive bouncy pads that make you disoriented. You're going to feel sick when you are no longer a slubbling for a while, which means you can't eat the next white mushroom. So you need lots of different players to be turning into slubblings throughout the fight to keep the floor clean, so you can actually even consider fighting the boss. So there will only be one white mushroom in the room at any time, so there'll be one at the start, and then you need to create a path to the next white mushroom so someone else can eat that. Then they need to create a path to the next white mushroom so that they can eat that, and so on, moving in a loop around the room. You're probably going to do at max 2 big circles of the room before you hit the enrage timer. It's actually a fairly short encounter, and once you hit that enrage timer, you're probably just going to die from the boss's crazy damage in the first place. So you're basically going to get about 2 rotations. Oh, and by the way, something I didn't mention, the coolest mechanic of all of this, Why don't you take any damage from the boss or the other mobs while you're a slubling? Well, it's because the game, on the fly, hot swaps the team you are allied with. When you're a slubling, you are allied with Slothasor, the main boss, and you are allied with all of his friendly slublings that he spawns himself. But you're an enemy of all of your friends. And what does that mean? That means friendly fire is a component in this fight. If the entire team is fighting on top of a white mushroom, just as a player wants to eat it to become a slubling, that player is going to get blown up by all of his friends. All CCs, all combis, all flat damage, everything's going to hit them. And if you die while you're a slubling, well, then you've just wasted that white mushroom and the poison's going to kill you a few seconds later. So you have to be very careful of that. A couple of key tips then. Make sure that you don't fight directly on top of the white mushrooms. Make sure that your slublings don't eat too much or clear too much ground too far ahead of you. The poison floors absolutely will respawn. So if you try and clear too far and your friends don't run up the path too quick, then they're all going to get the green poison haze coming on them, and then that's going to end up hurting them. And just make sure you stay clear. Make sure everyone in the group is aware that one of the enemies around them is actually an ally that they shouldn't be killing. Double dodging after you get through the white mushroom is also very useful, as well as if you've got like a long duration invuln skill, like Obsidian Flesh is one of the only skills in the game that really works like this. You can pop that, then go into the mushroom, and you'll be invulnerable for those first few seconds, giving you time to move out into the poison haze, where you're probably not going to get cleaved down because your friends aren't there, because hey, it's poison and they'd die if they were there. If you can nail that, then that's basically how to even be safe in the room, and you can actually start looking at fighting the boss. That idea of team hot swapping, by the way, happens a lot in Wooden 2, and we'll be coming back to that mechanic in the second and the third encounters also. Alright, moving on to mechanic 2. Still not quite ready to talk about the boss himself and what he does, but I want to talk about the allies he ends up spawning for himself in the room, also known as slublings. So you have an allied slubling that I've already been talking about, but also many enemy slublings. So over the fight, these things will be continuously spawning in the center of the room. They spawn so fast that without major damage and major focus from multiple players of your team, which by the way would then probably be taking that damage away from the boss too, you're never really going to be able to keep up with their spawn rate, and eventually they will overwhelm you. Or you've spent so long focusing on that, you didn't have time to kill the boss in the end, and you've been killed by something else instead. Maybe there is a very, very elaborate strategy where everyone stays in the middle of the room perfectly, clearing the green haze just right so that you can have that major damage focus on them and keep the boss there, but it's not something that we ever practically tried, and it's probably not what the devs are going for. It seems that they designed this such that you're basically meant to ignore the ads and let them keep spawning, and instead just deal with the way they do damage, mitigate their hits. So here's the thing, slublings are almost exclusively, there are some melee attacks, almost exclusively stay at range and use projectiles. Projectiles that you can deflect or reflect. So if one of them lands, it will corrupt your boons, as I mentioned earlier, and this will be what slowly does that. If you can imagine when there's tons of slublings around, all firing tons of projectiles, if they manage to get at you, and you have, say, 6 boons on you, all of a sudden you've got 6 condis on you, and all of a sudden you've taken a lot of damage. So the more slublings that spawn, the worse it gets, the more the perks of your comp start getting turned against you. So it will corrupt boons, it will do damage, and towards the end of the fight, there's just going to be so many of them that it's this hellish rain of fire that is quite insane and awesome to see, that you're instantly going to die as soon as your beautiful little sanctuary of safety is penetrated. So the idea is you ignore the ads and you keep the reflect and the deflect on the group at all times. Now, that might sound crazy and too difficult to pull off, but it's actually quite easy when you're in a 10-man group. Don't forget that, say, a Swirling Winds, which deflects projectiles in a huge area, that will just deflect all projectiles. In a way, it's a skill that benefits 10 of your allies instead of 5. You have 10 different players with 10 different skill bars, all with multiple professions having lots of different ways to mitigate projectiles, and so it's actually quite easy. It's far easier in this raid to keep that permanent protection up than it is, say, in dungeons. The problem is it's harder to accomplish this in this encounter because you also have to move a lot, and a lot of reflection skills are quite static. They can easily then be ran out of when you're forced to run out of them because of the green haze in the room or some other mechanics we'll talk about in a second. So that's where your challenge is. We actually tried a lot of different things. First, we just kind of tried having people throwing some generic projectile mitigation on their bars, and there's a lot of it. You've got Guardians are a great choice because they've got Wall of Reflection, they've got Shield of the Avenger. Mesmers, obviously, a lot of people are going to be running the Chronomancers anyway. You've got feedback on rezzing people, you have Temporal Curtain, you've got Phantasmal Wardens, you've got stuff like Smokescreen on Thief. Thief was something I was playing for a while. Thief, by the way, I would just throw in as a side note, is a great class to play when you are learning encounters. It is flat out, in my opinion, the easiest thing to play in the game. Currently, your highest damage is just auto-attacking, and I believe dodging when you get max endurance, so that you lose a bit more endurance, and then you get a damage perk again. That's it. And everything else of your focus can be on the rest of the encounter, and then when you get a bit better in the encounter, then you can start playing other builds. I love Thief for progression at the moment, and Thief can contribute here too, because not only can you deflect the projectiles with a smoke screen, but if you're in a weird situation where a slubling's quite close, you can blind them too. You can block them. All this generic stuff absolutely works. They don't penetrate any defenses, really. Now, one of the other big strategies my group tried, we got stuck on for a long time, and I believe is what caused us to struggle on the boss for such a long period of time, was Ventari Revenants. So this sounds like a match made in heaven. You can have a Ventari Revenant just drop his tablet. The tablet deflects all projectiles, and the entire group just stands in the tablet. The tablet also is very mobile. It can be moved on demand whenever the raid wants it to. And there you go. That's your defense from the slublings right there in one player. Or two. We ran two Ventari Revenants. But the problem we found was the Revenants weren't pulling enough weight in terms of their own damage, perhaps. They weren't able to upkeep the tablet and also use many of their own profession things because it costs so much energy for them. And in the end, the strategy we settled on was using a lot of Elementalists running Dagger Focus. Most Elementalists these days, or Tempests these days rather, run Dagger Warhorn, but the Focus is fantastic for this fight. We had about 4 or 5 Ellies, and without even formally assigning, oh, Swelling Winds 1 on this person, Swelling Winds 2 on this person, Swelling Winds 3 on this person, just saying to people, hey, if you see a Swelling Winds is down, use it again. This one skill on so many of our players was enough for us to very comfortably get around the slublings, keep that protection on us, and also it was loaded on characters that were doing really significant damage, good damage. Actually, after our first day of running the raid, we found we were doing kind of mediocre damage. We were taking a long time, and then the second day, when we all looked at our comp a bit better, we maybe had some better Mesmer quickness running around on us. A lot of us ended up running the group DPS meter, which was very interesting. As soon as that happened, it seemed our damage went through the roof. Killing this guy quickly is absolutely what you want to aim to do. It has nothing to do with the enrage timer in the top right hand corner of the screen. We killed him with 2 minutes left on the clock. We never came close to having him formally enrage, but the problem is the longer you stay in this arena, the higher chance it is that someone's going to wipe to a certain one of his abilities we'll discuss in a second, and so the faster you can kill him, the better, basically. And this ended up being the winning strat for us, running a lot of Tempests with Focus in their offhands. Focus as well is fantastic because it gives all the Elementalists, as long as they're playing it correctly, an on-demand invulnerability that can allow you to just shrug off some of the main boss's biggest attacks, and so it was just very, very useful in many, many, many respects. I would point out as well that right towards the end of the fight, when you have millions of slublings around, it really is fantastic to see, and these huge rains of fire. There are evolved slublings that begin to spawn as well. I believe when the boss gets about below 20% of his health. However, I'm not entirely sure what these guys do. My suspicion would be that they maybe have piercing capabilities, and these guys actually will get through your Swelling Winds or your projectile deflection. Perhaps they have a little bit more health, perhaps they do more damage, perhaps they have more melee attacks, because some of these slublings do seem to have like little melee bounces. You can assess what the evolved slublings do before the boss fight in the little corridor where you clear some trash before it, but it's hard to tell, and it wasn't something that our group really focused on too much. With this mechanic, general summary then, you'll find everything is okay if you have a lot of projectile deflection, but as people start dying, as things start getting chaotic because of other mechanics, the second that impenetrable wall, your zone of happiness, falls, people will get slaughtered. The slublings will break through and their damage will annihilate you. So be prepared for that. That is the #1 thing you always need to focus on when chaos descends on your group. Keep the projectile deflections rolling. Okay, With that stuff said, let's move on to perhaps what the boss himself is doing. In many ways, this encounter feels a lot like Sabother, and this next mechanic number 3, is super reminiscent to the way some of her things work. So, what Slothasor will do as you are fighting him is, on occasion, put a mark on someone known as volatile poison. This will appear in the chat log for you in red saying volatile poison. It will appear as a giant green skull on top of one of your players' heads. Now, volatile poison, just as its name would suggest, sacks damage onto you over time. So you're going to slowly get hurt. Depending on how tanky your class is innately, will really affect how actually damaging this thing feels. But really, the main threat from volatile poison isn't the slow ticking damage it puts on one of your players every now and then, but it's what happens when volatile poison ends. Volatile poison, when it ends, will place an AoE on the ground of expanding poison that the entire group will start taking large amounts of damage. So, the solution to this is obvious, really. It's if you see you have volatile poison on you, you move away from the group, you stand to the back of the room or as far away on the path as you can without going into the green haze poison, and when it runs out, it will run out over there, and the AoE everybody can ignore. Sure, it will expand, but by the time it's got really big, you all will have moved on because your allied slublings will have moved you along. So that seems pretty okay, but the problem comes when you remember that the slublings are filling the room towards the end, and they will nail anyone who is caught outside of the projectile mitigation. So you want to be very careful about when you move out. You want to wait until the last moment and then get far away from the group, drop the volatile poison back there, then move back in. If somebody makes a mistake and leaves that volatile poison in the area that you're trying to currently fight, it can be really deadly for the entire group, force you to move faster than you actually wanted to, and maybe there aren't any pathways ready for you, and it's just that extra little bit of pressure that will end up killing people. I think it's easy to be too scared about the volatile poison when you get it on you and move too far away from the group to push it too far away, and then you're totally on your own. Don't forget that volatile poison will actually sack your health down as well. So especially on my Elementalist and Thief, for example, while I was playing this encounter, I'd get volatile poison on me, and I would be alone, unshielded, already on low health. I'd drop the poison, thus saving the entire group, but then get killed by the slublings or the green haze before I can get back in. Thankfully, Elementalist and Thief are classes that have downstate abilities, allowing me to get back to the group. So depending on what class you're playing, we'll have to determine how conservative you are with this mechanic. The other thing to note about volatile poison is if you are about to eat a white mushroom and you have volatile poison on you, it will drop it right there and then. And if you think about the way I've described eating white mushrooms works here, that means it's pretty much always going to put volatile poison in a bad place. So there are two ways to deal with this. Number one, you can just wait, drop the volatile poison somewhere safe, then eat your mushroom. Or, if you're a little bit scared, if you're a little bit panicked by that, if you have to keep moving very quickly, which often you do, you can set up a contingency plan where you say, okay, this player is going to eat the white mushroom, but if he has poison on him, this player will do it instead. And you all come to that understanding, you all have the awareness to know what's going on, and you move forward. This feels a lot like Sabother. It's very similar to when you move too close to Sabother in the previous wing, and it puts that personal bomb on you, and somebody has to actually comprehend and have the awareness that it's on them, move away, and then they'll be able to deal with it. So that's mechanic number 3. That's another little thing that puts extra pressure on the group. Caused a few wipes for us, but fairly easy to understand once you know what's going on. Just watch out for the green skulls above your heads and move away if it's on you. Mechanic number 4 is also very similar to volatile poison in that occasionally as the fight goes on, one of the players in your 10-man group will get an icon above their head that they have to react to somehow. And this is to do with the way aggro management works in this fight. We've already seen a couple of ways ArenaNet have played with aggro management in Wing 1. They did it through toughness, they've done it through range. Well, here, it's a hard-baked mechanic into the encounter. Every single one of your 10 players at some point is probably going to become the tank. And when I say the tank, I mean the person who manipulates where Slothasor, the main boss, is going. So you obviously only have certain restricted paths you can move through the green haze at any time. You want to make sure that the boss is moving along with you as best you can. Now, as the fight goes on, as I say, people will sometimes get volatile poison, but sometimes people will also become fixated. Fixated by the boss. Slothasor is going to decide I hate you, and only you for this next period of time. So if you see that you are fixated, the game will broadcast who is fixated. It will appear in your chat and you'll have the marker above your head. You are the one that the boss is going to be swinging all of his auto attacks at, all of his primary attacks at, and moving towards. And you, therefore, need to be the person in front of the rest of the group. When you are fixated, you need to run ahead down the path that your slubling ally is creating for you, and Slothasor will follow you while the rest of your team stands behind him and DPSs him. It's very important they stand behind him. I'll explain why in a second because one of his abilities. But this creates kind of an interesting formation for your group where you have 8 players on the boss, a slubling out in the haze creating paths, and a fixated tank player basically stood almost with the slubling, trying to survive on their own, having the boss move forwards with them. This is very easy to deal with in the early stages of the fight, but a little bit later on, it can become quite hard when that one player who's fixated is on their own and has potentially a lot of slublings throwing attacks at them. So we did play with a couple of strategies where we had like a healer escorting the person who was fixated, but largely everyone should be moving as a unit, and if you're fixated and you find you get very, very, very low, it might be better just to duck in for a second, get yourself healed up, and then continue the boss moving. So that is important. It's very important whoever's fixated keeps the boss going, because if you aren't fast enough to move the boss along the path that the slublings created, then the green haze is going to close in on everyone, and you're going to wipe to that. So that's the general feel of the fight, I guess, laid out now. You're always watching for the damage you're doing. You're obviously your skill rotations, making sure you're killing the boss as fast as you can be. But you're watching to see if you get randomly volatile poison on you. At any time that could happen, or at any time you could become fixated. And every one of your 10 players needs to react accordingly. That's why this feels a little bit like Sabbather. And you need to keep the boss moving. So why is this kind of a hard thing to deal with? Well, it's because of the way that Slothasor does his own attacks. So let's talk about him now. One of his main attacks that you see him do continuously throughout the fight is a big flamethrower strike. The flamethrower is a giant cone-shaped point-blank AoE thing that does huge amounts of burning damage and huge amounts of flat damage. If you're caught in front of it, you're probably almost guaranteed to go down. I found that when I was playing a Necromancer with full Death Shroud, I could face tank the entire thing so that I could reflect the conditions back at him. But generally, any other build that I played, it is absolutely something you want to avoid. This is why, with your group positioning, you tend to have 8 people behind the boss, basically stood on his ass and hitting him from behind, while the other 2 players are out in front. The slubling doesn't have to worry about the flamethrower attack because he's allied to the Slothasor, and the main person to worry about it is actually the fixated player, because the fixated player is going to be in front of Slothasor, and that's where the flames are going to be directed at, but you can outrange it and you can stand to the side. This ability is actually quite easy to avoid once you just understand how its general cone is shaped, and it's nearly always better, I found, to move closer to the Slothasor and to the side than further away from him where, you know, the cone becomes wider and you're even more likely to get hit. But that happens continuously. It's very easy to slip your mind where you're dealing with all the other mechanics. Oh god, I'm suddenly volatile poisoned and I'm low and oh my god, all of a sudden a flamethrower is blowing me up. But you need to remember it's always going to be coming. While he does this, he stands still. And that makes it very difficult for him to move, especially when you realize every single one of his abilities causes him to stand still. That's terrifying when at any second the poisonous haze around you could close in again. That's why the fixated player needs to stay so far ahead at all times. Another of Slothasor's abilities is a large knockdown. I couldn't quite tell if this was supposed to be the rocks from the ceiling falling on us or what, but essentially he'll stand there, he'll hammer the ground, you'll see a bunch of yellow AoEs appear around him. These I would recommend you guys don't try to dodge roll out of, just walk out of them. They're very similar to the Veil Guardian mechanic where he paints the ground with these blue crystals that shatter. You can just walk back, and by walking instead of dodging, for most classes that means you can keep auto-attacking, you can keep doing your damage, and if you do it this way, you no longer have a reliance on endurance. There's going to be other things you want to dodge throughout the fight, and if you get used to this mechanic as just something you strafe out of instead of dodge roll out of, you're not accidentally going to get caught out at some point because you had no endurance. Just remember, you can strafe out of it, get used to it, and you'll be fine. There's another one of his abilities. It also occurs very frequently. If you're playing one of the Swirling Wind Ellies, by the way, your cooldown of Obsidian Flesh pretty much matches perfectly the cooldown of this ability of the Slothasor. So you can essentially just ignore it. You just go into Earth Attunement, Obsidian Flesh, straight back into air, go again. And you can ignore it as best you can. Keep to the side of the flamethrowers, and for the start of the fight, that's all Slothasor really does. Drag him around the room, and DPS the hell out of him. Great. So we're in a situation where we're DPSing the hell out of the boss. Every 20% of his health, a new mechanic shows its face. This is where Slothasor lives up to his name, and he just falls asleep. No, literally, he plays an animation where he goes invulnerable and falls asleep. Kind of an interesting use of break bar, where instead of breaking the break bar to prevent some kind of giant nuke attack, as we usually see, it's literally just, oh, the boss is invulnerable unless you get all of these CCs on. It's actually a very easy mechanic to deal with. You have to deal with it every 20% of his health, but where it really starts to shine is later on in the encounter, where maybe he's going to go to sleep just as the poisonous haze is closed in around everyone, or you've been forced away to range him. Sometimes the entire group may need to run down a path that a slubling's created just to get Slothasor to move as fast as possible, and then, oh no, he's suddenly hit the threshold and he's fallen asleep out there, and nobody can get close enough to do all of their CCs. A lot of you guys should know that one of the biggest ways to break bars right now is Revenants using their star 5s. Well, you can't exactly use melee things like that to break bars when you're forced miles away from him because of the green haze. So that's where the mechanic becomes kind of interesting. Mostly though, it's just don't blow massive cooldowns when you see he's fallen asleep. Instead, use your CC abilities, wake him up again, and then you can start doing damage again. That's all it is. It's just a stall, and you want to get through it as quick as possible. So every 20% health, he's going to do that. But after 50% of his health is gone, his most dangerous attack will start to rear its head. For what it's worth, on my group, when we finally managed to kill him, we were getting him to half health and triggering this ability by the 4th white mushroom over in the back left corner of the room with respect to where you're looking at him at the start of the raid. Now, this ability we called Wet Dog. I'm not actually sure what the exact name is, but he'll shake himself like a wet dog, like you've seen some Oakarts do their animations in the game before. And very similar to Bloomhunger in Fractals, it will create these very large, high-arcing projectiles that move slowly away from him. If you're in melee, then they'll land instantly, so you have to react very quickly. But if you're far away, they'll move slowly. That do ungodly amounts of damage, ridiculous amounts of damage. You can invulnerable through it, and when they land, they'll do stacks of multiple damaging conditions on you. So you can see there's a lot of condition play in this encounter, probably more out of any other wing. In many ways, this makes Necromancers shine. I was playing a Necro for a while. Think about it, you have a permanent poison generator at your feet just from wading into the haze while you're in Shroud that you can reflect back onto him. And if you have a max bar of Shroud, you can actually deliberately eat this attack, no really, believe me, and transfer it back onto him to put 20 burn, 20 torment, 20 bleed, and more just very, very handily, very comfortably onto him continuously on a Necromancer, as long as you've got the heals and you're quick enough to be able to pull it off. So that's pretty cool. But this attack is very, very deadly. This is what we struggled with most. This is what we wiped with most. I think it's very akin to classic Lupicus from Ara when the game first released. You'd find a lot of groups didn't know how to deal with his giant nuke ability, and it's the same here. Basically, people just need to practice, get ready for the tell, listen for a friend to call it out in TeamSpeak if you're not good at seeing it yourself, and don't just dodge, but I would even recommend double dodging. Keep close to him just as it goes, and eventually you'll be fine. Again, with Elementalists on their Swirling Winds builds, in vulnerabilities, Obsidian Flesh, I start using whenever that appears, and again, Obsidian Flesh comes off of cooldown for almost every wet dog out there, and you'll be perfectly safe shrugging that off and just continuing to damage through. Don't forget you can pop Rebound in anticipation of other people dying, and this is really the deadly part. What will tend to happen that will cause most of your wipes is he'll do this ability, a couple of people will go downstate, then the Swirling Winds, or your chosen method of stopping projectiles, goes down for a brief moment, and the slubs come in and slam you, and you can't recover. All of a sudden, you're behind. The person who's fixated maybe was the guy that died, and Slothazor's not moving. Maybe something bad happened with a white mushroom, and you accidentally killed your own person there, and the green haze is going to come in. And all of these things I've talked about throughout this entire video all come back to bite you because they're all going on all at once. Perhaps you get knocked into downstate right as you had volatile poison on you. And not only do you have this horrible amount of Condi and dead players, but you've got volatile poison expanding as well. You need to dodge this attack. This is the main thing that will screw you. Be prepared to help other people out and keep the reflects going. Even if half of your team is in the downstate, you'll be surprised at how well you can actually res up as long as you keep those projectile walls in place. So that's what you have to deal with for the next 50% of the fight. That's why I recommend trying to get as much damage as you can, because the more damage you do, the less wet dogs you'll have to endure. And hopefully you can kill him before things slip too far out of your control. As I say, right towards the end of the battle, evolved slublings do spawn, but they weren't anything we focused on too much. We just kept our eye on the game, and eventually we managed to kill him, as you can see in this run that's been going on in the background here. We had a lot of very close runs on this. I believe 3 different runs where you can even see his health bar anymore. And it felt very good to finally get past him. Like I say, I struggled on this guy more than Veilguard. Absolutely more than Veilguard. However, I know a lot of other groups managed to get through it a lot more comfortably than I did. So you'll just have to see how you fare. I think that's pretty much all of the tips that I've got for you guys. Focus on your comp. Keep an eye out for all of those mechanics. Eventually, you will nail it. Be aware if your damage is too low, because more damage, as always, definitely does help, just because you don't have to endure all the mechanics for so long. Overall, I really enjoyed this fight. I found it fantastic. I was very happy to see a lot of those old dungeon mechanics come back. The fact that blinds and things were useful again. I mean, it was fairly easy to speculate the devs were going to go that route, but the feeling you get when you are so overwhelmed at the end with so many ads in the area is brilliant. There's also a very cool achievement to do with a yellow mushroom we may talk about soon, but we'll maybe leave that for another day. So there you go, guys. I'll see you tomorrow for Encounter 2. Hopefully some of you found something useful here. Let me know what you think. How do you think ArenaNet are doing with their raid design at the moment? If you've got any other questions, feel free to leave them in the comments, how people deal with certain things. I will at least be responding and trying to be helpful, and I'm sure there's a lot of other very knowledgeable people out there too. So cheers, guys. Hope you enjoyed the video. I'll see you next time. They don't seem to have enough flavor to them to make them as fun as they could be, as you see in some other games, right? Like, the main thing when it comes to rune and sigil discussion, a lot of people always cite games like Diablo to me, right? Like, and I can see